Guatemala, social movements denounced an attempted electoral coup after a federal prosecutor requested the suspension of the Semilla party. Candidate Bernardo Arevalo said they would not comply with an unconstitutional order. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warns that the delivery of F-16 to Ukraine will be considered a nuclear threat. And in Sudan's Western Darfur region, mass graves were found with more than 80 bodies. Women and children were among the victims. Hello, welcome from the south. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Guatemala, several social movements denounced the attempted electoral coup after the decision of the public ministry to suspend the political party Semilla and its candidate Bernardo Arevalo, who should face the former First Lady Sandra Torres in the runoff. The organizations Transparencia Internacional, Acción Ciudadana, among others, stated in a communique that the decision to suspend the political party Semilla is illegal and urged the Supreme Electoral Tribunal to ignore the judicial resolution. According to the different social entities, the objective of the criminal suspension of Semilla is to carry out an electoral coup equivalent to a coup d'etat. On Wednesday, Guatemalan Social Movements rejected the decision of Prosecutor Rafael Curruchiche. In this sense, the Altiplano's former committee holds him responsible for several acts that have endangered the country's democracy.
Yes, very good evening. This meeting has been called as a matter of urgency to pronounce ourselves on the current context that the country is going through regarding the electoral process. The tribunal is making a pronouncement today which for us is a demagogy discourse. It is a discourse that practically intends to neutralize the population while they continue to prepare really. How can attempt against our democracy in the country?
The presidential candidate of the Semilla party, Bernardo Arevalo, was sure that they would not abide by the judge's order suspending them. Judge Rafael Curruchiche, head of the Special Prosecutor's Office Against Corruption, requested the suspension of the legal status of the Semilla movement. The Seventh Court ordered it based on an alleged falsification of signatures that occurred in 2019. However, the Supreme Electoral Court determined that the candidates of UNE and of the Semilla party would be the ones to pass to the runoff election. The latter assured after announcing that they would be rated that they did not abide by the decision. Arevalo presented a preventive injunction at the Constitutional Court in Guatemala City.
Yes, we know that it is absolutely illegal, and as the Constitution says, illegal orders cannot be complied with, especially an order that in fact constitutes a rupture of the constitutional order. We are acting at this moment, presenting the corresponding legal resources to denounce this rupture of this constitutional order and call for the necessary measures to be taken. In any case, we are moving forward in the electoral process.
During an interview on a national TV channel, Arevalo described the decision of the Guatemalan justice system as a technical coup d'etat.
All sectors of Guatemalan society who want democracy, who want the rule of law, who want a dignified state, we must converge, we must unite, we must rally around the condemnation of this action, which is nothing more than a technical coup d'etat.
On Wednesday, the plenary of magistrates of the Guatemalan Supreme Electoral Tribunal made official the results of the elections with the presidential candidates that will go to the runoff election.
We have to rule in this case. We have not been notified at this moment, or we are not aware of it. We were in a plenary meeting, and we are not aware at this moment of the scope of this resolution as such. Definitely, it is something that worries us as a court, because we know that elections are won at the ballot boxes as a result of the sacred vote of the citizens. And that is why we have been working for a long time to prepare the first and the eventual runoff elections. We know it is not eventual. We know that it is.
In Ecuador, the electoral authority announced that presidential candidates can start campaigning this Thursday for the August 20th elections. The National Electoral Council extended the electoral campaign by more than a month after confirming that all the appeals had been resolved. The process was originally scheduled for August 8th to the 17th. The electoral authorities also decided to increase the electoral promotion fund. Two councillors, Elena Nájera and Stella Acero, abstained because they considered that the decision violated the political rights of the organizations.
The calendar and action plan for the 2023 presidential and legislative elections has been updated. The electoral campaign period has been extended from July 13th through August 17th, 2023. It should be noted this extension only applies to the category of president and vice president, which had already closed at the administrative and jurisdictional level. The decision was made taking into account the need of the people to fully know what the government agenda of the candidates is, so that they can vote responsibly.
Let's now take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back from the south. On Thursday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned that the Western Bloc's F-16 fighter jets transferred to Ukraine will be considered a nuclear threat, as these aircraft are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. The head of the Russian diplomacy addressed in particular the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, pointing out that they are aware of the capabilities of these aircraft. Lavrov assured in an interview to a Russian media that the appearance of these systems in the Ukrainian armed forces will be considered as a threat from the Western powers in the nuclear field. In this sense, he specified that Russia has clearly defined the conditions for the use of these weapons in its military doctrine. In Lithuania on Wednesday, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization agreed to continue to strengthen the arms campaign in favor of the Kiev regime without concluding its accession to the warmongering entity. In the framework of this summit, the NATO member countries discussed the future of Ukraine's accession, emphasizing that it must fulfill the proper conditions before joining the bloc. G7 countries pledged to commit to Ukrainian security by providing modern military equipment, armory, and long-range devices. The United States also agreed to provide about $3.8 billion in military aid over a decade and propose a model for Ukraine similar to the one its country maintains with Israel. For its side, Ukraine committed to contribute positively to the security of partners and to strengthen transparency and accountability measures regarding assistance to them. We now welcome David Swanson, Executive Director of World Beyond War and Campaign Coordinator for Roots Action, to go deeper on the analysis of the current world stage and how it can develop in the future. Hello, David. Welcome. David, can you hear me?
I hear you. I'm very sorry. Thank you. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure for us to have you with us. David, let's go very quickly to the first question. The NATO summit concluded with more promises of military aid to Kiev. The French said they will supply long-range missiles. Other members referred to the supply of F-16 fighter jets. So it seems that NATO is less focused in finding a solution out of the conflict, but instead continue fueling it with the delivery of these military aid packages. How is world stability affected by NATO's eastward expansion and warmongering policies?
Well, it is further destabilized, and they are quite open about intending the war to continue at length. This is the message of concluding that Ukraine can become a member of NATO after the war ends, because not only, as many people have observed, would that be likely to restart the war, but it's very unlikely that the war can end without a commitment from Ukraine not to join NATO. So this is a recipe for endless war unless the end is nuclear. And of course, the ideal solution is to get back to the negotiating table. And ultimately, the ideal solution is to stop excluding Ukraine from NATO, but to abolish NATO, which is a destabilizing force in the world, adding Finland and Sweden, adding countless weapon sales, adding aggression in the Arctic after fossil fuels, adding the border of Finland and Russia, and the Baltic becoming a place where you can't put a pipeline without it being blown up. This is going to put pressure on places like Austria and Ireland and Switzerland and end the very idea of neutrality. So this was not a helpful meeting for the world.
Last week, David, the U.S. announced the delivery of cluster munition to Ukrainian forces, something that even some NATO members have not agreed with. As we know, these type of munitions are highly harmful, especially for the civilian population. For its part, the Russian military has warned they would respond if these munitions are used. There are reports that they have already been used, these type of munitions, near the Zaporizhzhia region. So the question is, how do you analyze the role the U.S. is playing in this context and its own geopolitical interest behind the decision to continue fueling the conflict?
Well, several months ago, the U.S. government was talking about cluster bombs as war crimes because it was accusing Russia of using them, as Russia apparently was. Ukraine has been using them as well. The United States has used them in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, and it's now sending them, and it's compelling its allies, its sidekicks, its NATO members to accept that. Europe is accepting cluster bombs despite the treaty that many European nations have joined, and Europe may be accepting Turkey into the European Union despite any concerns over Turkey's behavior as part of this deal. That remains to be seen. But the fighter jets, the cluster bombs, the fighter jets were described as World War III by President Joe Biden months ago, and now they're sending them in. And the excuse is always, well, Russia is doing it. And the excuse by Russia in putting nukes in another country, Belarus, etc., is always the US is doing it. Well, this is a recipe for endless escalation until somebody uses nuclear weapons.
You're right, David, and in this context that NATO continues to expand and is a destabilizing force in the world, there is another group that is emerging that could maybe act as a counterweight. They will surely have a summit in South Africa, and we're talking about BRICS. So in your opinion, what do you believe will be the reach of BRICS that can act as a counterweight to NATO's military expansionisms and the conflicts in the world to reach a new multipolar world?
Well, what I think is most encouraging is the support for peace and disarmament and global cooperation and the rule of law that is coming from some BRICS members. I don't think a balance of hostile forces is going to save us. We need global cooperation. We are in the hottest days this planet has seen, guaranteed to get hotter, and we can't be focusing on balances of powers between hostile military forces. And BRICS cannot be a force for global rule of law when Russia is a member and alongside the United States, one of the biggest opponents of the global rule of law. The United States is, of course, courting India, which makes a problem for BRICS as well. What I would love to see BRICS do would be to support bringing the world together, despite the behavior of rogue nations like the United States and Russia, in support of equal law for all and cooperation on crises that we have no choice about.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson, so much for your inputs and for your time here today with us.
Thank you.
Well, we were talking with David Swanson, Executive Director of World Beyond War, analyzing the current state of world stability and the future outlook of the international arena. We will now take a final short break, so don't go away, we have more news coming up. Welcome back from the south. In Italy, authorities registered the first death amidst a scorching heat wave hitting Europe, reaching record highs of 45 degrees Celsius. The victim was a 44-year-old construction worker who died on a roadside in Lodi City in the north of the country. Given the seriousness of the situation, some parliamentarians and politicians, as Nicola Fratoianni, requested a regulation to protect workers. The heat in Italy has also affected the tourist industry. Last Tuesday, several tourists collapsed in Rome as a result of heat stroke. In the U.S. northwestern state of Vermont, over 100 people had to be evacuated due to historic flooding caused by torrential rains in the last few hours. According to local media, rescue workers had to use inflatable boats to evacuate the residents of the affected areas. The floods occurred mainly in the state capital, Montpelier. Governor Phil Scott said that the devastation and floods are of catastrophic proportions, surpassing the damage caused by Tropical Storm Irene. U.S. President Joe Biden declared a state of emergency in Vermont, which allows federal aid to be released. In Sudan, a report to which the United Nations Human Rights Office grants full credibility claims that at least 87 Masalites were buried in mass graves in Western Darfur. Residents of El Geneina region claimed they were executed by paramilitary rapid support forces. Residents themselves buried them in mass graves as their exposed bodies were decomposing in open view of everyone. 37 victims were buried on June 20th and 50 others, including 7 women and 7 children, were buried on June 21st in the Ranga area. The High Commissioner for Human Rights has called on the paramilitaries to allow and facilitate a rapid search for the deceased. President Ibrahim Raisi received a red carpet welcome in Zimbabwe on Thursday on the last leg of the first Africa tour by an Iranian leader in 11 years. Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa greeted Raisi as "my brother" on the tarmac after the Iranian leader's plane landed at Robert Mugabe International Airport in the capital, Harare. Hundreds of people, many from southern African countries' Muslim community, including women wearing headscarves and school children holding welcome banners, turned out at the airport. Raisi has already been to Kenya and Uganda this week, holding talks with his counterparts William Ruto and Yoweri Museveni. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Nasser Kanani has described Raisi's continental tour as a new turning point, which could bolster economic trade ties with African nations. On Wednesday, authorities registered at least 9 demonstrators killed during protests against the increase in fuel taxes in Kenya. The demonstrations, called by opposition leader Raila Odinga, have been heavily repressed by security forces. Human rights groups put the death toll at 12, and the number of injured could exceed 100. Security forces say protesters sheltered in makeshift barricades attacked the security forces with stones. Despite the fact that the African nation's constitution allows for demonstrations, human rights organizations reiterate the repressive nature of the police. Pakistan's defense ministry confirmed the death of 12 soldiers on the border of Balochistan amid clashes with heavy armed terrorists. The clash took place in the town of Sob on Afghan-Iranian border. The terrorists attempted to attack the military headquarters and were repelled by the troops at the base. After the fight, 9 soldiers died of serious wounds, and later, in another exchange of fire, but this time in the district of Sioux, 3 other soldiers were killed. The military report also confirms 5 soldiers wounded and 5 terrorists neutralized. Saudi Arabia greeted the decision of the United Nations Human Rights Council condemning Quran burning. According to Saudi authorities, the Council's action has shown the principles of respect for religions and cultures and contributes to the promotion of human values supported by international law. The resolution rejected any destructive acts that seek to promote hatred and extremism. The decision was announced after massive protests around the world against the burning of a Quran on May 28th in Stockholm in front of a mosque. And we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website, TeleSURenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.